On April 25, 1986, at 1 a.m., the operators at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant began reducing power at reactor number 4 in preparation for a safety test. 2 p.m., reactor number 4's emergency core cooling system is disabled to keep it from interfering with the test. At the same time, the test and shutdown are temporarily delayed to accommodate the region's power needs. 11:10 p.m., operators receive permission to continue with the test and shutdown. By now, the less experienced night shift is on the job, which have never received proper instructions on how to perform the test. 12:28 a.m. Power plummets to far below the level at which the reactor is considered stable. Operators respond by removing most of the control rods in violation of the plant's safety guidelines. They still have trouble raising the power, in part due to the xenon buildup in the core. 1 a.m. The power stabilizes at a lower than preferred level, and the nuclear engineer in charge of the test, Anatoly Dyatlov, orders the test to proceed. The automatic emergency shutdown system and other safety features are subsequently turned off. 1:23:04 a.m. The test officially begins. An unexpected power surge occurs. 1:23:40 a.m. Soviet engineer Leonid Toptanov presses the emergency shutdown button AZ5, but control rods jam as they enter the core. 1:23:58 a.m. The first explosion, to be quickly followed by at least one more, blows the 1,000-ton roof right off the reactor and shoots a fireball into the night sky. A blackout roils the plant as air fills with dust and graphite chunks and radiation begins spewing out. Walls and equipment collapse, and dozens of fires start up, including one on top of the neighboring reactor. Despite all evidence to the contrary, Dyatlov insists that reactor number 4 is still intact. At least 30 people died from Chernobyl's initial explosion, but many will say that the total death toll is much higher. The Chernobyl disaster was back in 1986, but it wouldn't be for several decades before a game was made about it. I believe the first game, or at least one of the first games about the incident, was Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl. This was the first game in the Stalker series which popularized the subject of Chernobyl in video games. The Stalker series is a collection of FPS survival horror games made by Ukrainian game developer GSC Game World. It takes place in the aftermath of the disaster in a fictional version of the Chernobyl exclusion zone where attempts were made to repopulate the area in 2006, but a second disaster took place and mutated most of the inhabitants. The first game in the series, Shadow of Chernobyl, was released in 2007, a whole 21 years after the real-life incident. It follows the story of a character called the Marked One who suffers from amnesia and has to navigate the zone while uncovering mysteries of his past. Despite being centered around a disaster, the game didn't really get any backlash and was widely enjoyed by players and has pretty good reviews on Steam. Following the success of Shadow of Chernobyl, GSC Game World released 2 more games in the Stalker series, Clear Sky in 2008 and Call of Pripyat in 2009. There's also another one on the way called Heart of Chernobyl, which is releasing this September. Even though the Stalker series doesn't really deal with the events of Chernobyl, it made popular the idea of Chernobyl-based video games. While there were a few more Chernobyl games after Stalker, the next notable one is called Chernobyl VR Project, made by the game studio The Farm 51, and released in 2016 as early access. This is less of a game and more of a simulator where you get to explore the abandoned city of Chernobyl and Pripyat in VR. It has mixed reviews on Steam, some people complaining about the lack of gameplay and poor visuals at times. 2 years after this, another Chernobyl-centered game was released, but it's not 100% what you'd expect. It's called Isotopium Chernobyl and is the first remote reality game. The alpha was launched in 2018, and players control real robots via the internet. These robots explore a miniature replica of the ghost town Pripyat. This isn't technically a video game as it uses real-world objects, but I think it's deserving to be mentioned just because of its innovative gameplay. However, in September 2022, the authors of the project didn't have enough money to rent the premises, so the unique layout of the city of Pripyat had to be dismantled. Rent money for the next 6 months to a year was collected with the help of donations, but further life and development of the project remain in question. Currently, Isotopium Chernobyl cannot be played. Another Chernobyl game was released in 2019 called Escape from Chernobyl. This is a point-and-click game where you try to escape the power plant after its explosion. There's 6 chapters and 3 alternate endings, and also a spin-off game, Escape from Chernobyl Jailbreak. In the game, you solve different puzzles while going through the atmospheric environments of the abandoned power plant. Another game released in 2019 is Chernobyl: The Untold Story, which is a 2D isometric game where you play as a man exhausted by radiation from the disaster. The game's story is about the delusions of the man's mind from the radiation, as he can't decide what's real or not. A lot of these games are fictional takes on the story of Chernobyl, as with Chernobyl-lite. Chernobyl-lite is a sci-fi hyper-realistic horror game set in the 3D scan environment of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. This is a really big game with base building and crafting, 3 different endings, and multiple different mechanics. This game is actually developed by the same studio who made the Chernobyl VR project. Chernobyl-lite was released in 2021 and is definitely one of the higher quality Chernobyl games. However, like I said, a lot of these games are fictionalized versions of the actual event, but Liquidators, released in 2020, is actually a retelling of a real occurrence. You see, after the explosion of the reactor, there was a huge fire in the reactor building. On the day of the disaster, firefighters pumped water into the reactor in hopes to extinguish the fire, but this was unsuccessful. So what the Soviet government had to do was drop sand and boron onto the burning reactor core to smother the fire, cool down the fuel, and reduce the intensity of the nuclear reactions. However, by doing this, they created a buildup of corium, which is the most radioactive material ever created. This molten core was melting through the building and it was going to reach the coolant tanks filled with water. If the corium substance made contact with the water, it would cause a radiation-contaminated steam explosion that would destroy the entire plant along with its 3 other reactors, causing unimaginable damage. The Chernobyl death toll would likely reach the millions. The blast would have had a force of 3 to 5 megatons, leaving much of Europe uninhabitable for hundreds of thousands of years. In order to prevent this, the pools containing some 20 million liters of water had to be drained, and the only way to do that was by manually turning the correct valves down in the now flooded basement. So 3 men were sent to do this, and it was thought to be a suicide mission because of the radioactive water. With this event in mind, someone made a game about it called Liquidators, where you play as the 3 men who have to drain the water. Liquidators is a horror game, but it uses nuclear horror, which, in my opinion, is the most horrifying. The game was created to raise awareness/support for the people that contained the fallout. Also, Markiplier played this game. StarCraft is an MMO FPS with survival horror elements set in the open world of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. It looks like a mix of Minecraft and Chernobyl. The Steam page says, originally, StarCraft was only conceived as a Minecraft fan modification that brings the world of Stalker into multiplayer mode. Over the past 7 years, the project has changed significantly and is now based on its own game engine. StarCraft was released in 2022 and is free to play on Steam. Chernobyl-inspired is another fictional take on the disaster where people hide underground from radiation and turn into mutants. You play as a guy whose main goal is to find your brother who got lost in the underground catacombs of Chernobyl. You have to survive against mutants with only a flashlight and stealth mechanics. This was released in 2022 and is $5 on Steam. I mentioned that a lot of these games are fictional takes on the Chernobyl disaster, with very few games being actual retellings of historical events. Well, Chernobyl Liquidators looks like it's going to be the most realistic one of these games. Not to be confused with just Liquidators, the previous game. The Steam page literally says, you will not fight mutants and monsters, instead work hard to contain the radiation. So it seems the developers are tired of the mutants seen in most Chernobyl games. This game looks extremely high quality, where you play as a liquidator who has to deal with the aftermath of the disaster. This game hasn't released yet, but it plans to launch in 2024. If you've seen my videos, you'll know that I've made some games as well. One of them being Basics in Intermediate Filmmaking. While not really about Chernobyl, it takes place at a power plant that had an accident, so I thought to include it for self-promo. In my game, you play as a filmmaker who wants to document what happened to the abandoned power plant of Fortitude Electric. This game has a lot of weird sci-fi stuff, not in the form of monsters or mutants, but different technology. If you want to play this for yourself, the link is in the description where you can buy it on Steam for $1. The Chernobyl disaster was a horrific event, costing many lives and greatly affecting more. A lot of these games are using Chernobyl as inspiration with loose details from the disaster. That doesn't make the games bad, it just varies the realism of the gameplay. Even though these games may enhance the original story with sci-fi elements to make it interesting, they serve as more than mere entertainment. They're a testament to human resilience, the consequences of pride, and enduring impact of environmental disasters. They cause us to ponder different themes like nuclear energy, safety protocols, and learning from past mistakes. If you want to play any of these games for yourself, I linked all of them in the description. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe and support me on Patreon. But that's just a theory. A Chernobyl theory. Thanks for watching.